In my previous video, I mentioned that I wasn't interested in watching Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Since then, I've watched the whole season, and it's fine. It's more of the same content that's meant to be momentarily consumed and discarded rather than create a dialogue that modern Marvel is built on. Despite comments from the show's creators about how different this version is from prior adaptations, it doesn't really do anything to carve out its own identity. A great example of what I'm talking about would be this quote from executive producer Jeff Trammell. "Peter Parker has had many friends over the years, but Peter and Nico Minoru as best friends? That's new. That's unique and immediately changes your perception of his world, because it changes Peter's perception as well." Does it? Because Peter's friendship with Nico isn't that different from his friendship with MJ, Miles, or his superhero teammates from the past 3 cartoons beyond the surface level. I was curious about how other people felt about this show, and after combing through several videos and Reddit posts, one that stuck out the most to me was a video by Cartoon Universe called "Is This the Slow Cancellation of Spider-Man?", which inspired me to make this video. His video covered the concept of the slow cancellation of pop culture through the oversaturation of Spider-Man media. Specifically, the idea that pop culture has become so obsessed with the past that we can't create anything genuinely new. He refers to Spider-Man as the best example of this, as he's a once revolutionary character who's now stuck rehashing old ideas ad nauseum, never being allowed to do anything that could risk altering the IP. If you think I'm over-exaggerating, then check out the leaked list of character integrity obligations Sony inherited from Marvel when renegotiating the movie rights in 2011. This got me thinking, when was the last time the original comics did something truly groundbreaking with this character? Something that deconstructs how we view the character, the type of storytelling that can be done with the comics medium, while still being accessible to casuals like the Spider-Verse movies did. Because those films show that it can be done. That in a time where pop culture is completely oversaturated with superhero media, that you can flip the genre on its head without turning everything into The Boys or Logan to challenge it. But in spite of those films' reverence for the original comics, I can't think of anything from the last 2 decades of comics that did anything truly groundbreaking like the Spider-Verse films did. So let's go over some examples of what people might point to for this type of storytelling, and why I don't think it works. The less familiar might ask, what about the Spider-Verse comics that the movies are based on? Well, the Spider-Verse movies and comics only shared similarities in their name and their use of the multiverse concept. The movies used the medium of animation to usher in a completely new style of digital storytelling, which brought CG movies out of a creative slump that had lasted for over a decade. They asked what it meant to be Spider-Man, and Miles' journey acts as a metaphor on the struggle of making one's own mark in a field where their predecessors have cast a very large shadow. This could be applied to the public perception of Peter Parker and Miles Morales' characters, as well as the film trying to escape the monolithic shadow that was cast by the live-action Spider-Man film franchise. There's a lot going on under the hood of these movies. The Spider-Verse comics, on the other hand, use the rich storytelling potential of the multiverse as nothing more than an excuse to bring together as many of the writer's favorite Spider-Man variants as possible, to smash together like cheap toys for shock value. It also made use of a villain who'd already outstayed his welcome under the pen of his original writer. There wasn't a desire to create anything greater than the comic book equivalent of a mindless blockbuster. And while I haven't read any of its sequels, they don't seem to do anything new with the narrative either, from what I can tell. The Ultimate Spider-Man 2024 reboot could be seen as doing something new, but beyond the initial hook of Peter Parker getting his powers as a middle-aged dad instead of as a teenager, there's really nothing new being told. There's nothing that challenges what can be done with this character in a medium where he's been stagnant for decades. It's content to just remix the familiar beats that will get fans to say, "What'll they do with X or Y character?" Much like the original Ultimate Spider-Man run. Not to mention that Ultimate Spider-Man is held back from being casual-friendly by being anchored to the greater continuity of the new Ultimate Universe, which itself is anchored to 15 years of continuity from the original Ultimate Universe from 2000. Chip Zdarsky's Spider-Man life story had the potential to change things, but much like the new Ultimate Spider-Man, once you get past the initial hook of, "What if Spider-Man aged in real time?" it's just another remix of the familiar tropes. It becomes a game of spotting the member berries. Hey, Peter and MJ are married with kids. Hey, it's the Black Suit arc, and they're the clones. There's a nod to Superior Spider-Man. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Superior Spider-Man could have done more, but that story was held back by the writer's continuity fetishism and a lack of a greater goal. There was no sense of wanting to achieve something greater than itself. Sure, it puts a supervillain in the body of our hero, but from issue 1 of Superior, we see that Peter Parker never actually left, and is guaranteed to regain control of his body. They didn't even wait a full issue to make the audience think he was really gone. In the end, it didn't have anything to say beyond,
Doc Ock can be redeemed. Isn't he cool?
and
Isn't Peter Parker great? Now that you've had some faith from him, even though he never left, let me remind you why Peter Parker's so great.
it took a story with loads of potential and didn't even run with it. It's like signing up to run a marathon only to leave after the starting line to get ice cream.
Well, what do you mean by challenging the status quo or deconstructing a character, you might ask? If none of those examples fit the criteria, then what does?
An example of what I'm talking about would be Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. This was a comic that was groundbreaking for its time. It was violent, portrayed the characters in ways that weren't seen in a mainstream superhero book. The Dark Knight Returns, in conjunction with the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, completely changed the public perception of the character, moving him away from Adam West's campy portrayal and changing what could be done with mainstream comic book storytelling. The Dark Knight Returns is one of several comics that had articles written about it as an example of comic books growing up. To this day, the dark Frank Miller-esque version of Batman is still seen as a default by the general public. Now, as many of you are probably aware, the fans, the writers, and publishers took away all the wrong lessons from The Dark Knight Returns, and later Watchmen, but the point still stands. It truly helped change superhero storytelling for its time. You can't deny that much. Once again, let me ask, when was the last time a Spider-Man comic did something like this? It's much further back than you think. The last time Peter Parker's Spider-Man did this was in the 1970s when Gwen Stacy was thrown from the George Washington Bridge. Yeah, a long time ago. The late great John Romita Sr., when asked about his thought process behind the decision, stated that it was essentially law in superhero storytelling that the hero's girl couldn't die. They could break up. She could be written out of story off panel, but she could never die at the hands of a supervillain. The death of Gwen Stacy changed things forever. Now nobody was safe just because they were the hero's lover. Readers were shocked and sent hate mail to Marvel staff calling them all kinds of nasty names for killing off Gwen.
You can't do that,
They cried, but the genie was out of the bottle, and there was no going back. This would unfortunately lead to some sexist trends down the line, i.e. the women in refrigerators trope, but that conversation reaches far outside the extent of this video. This wasn't the first time Spider-Man comics had challenged the status quo either, and this next one didn't even need violence to do it. Before Stan Lee left the book, there was the iconic 3-part story which portrayed Harry Osborn and other college-age kids struggling with drug addiction. The comic was rejected by the Comics Code Authority for portraying drug use, even in a negative depiction, despite being asked to do the story by the National Institute of Mental Health. But Stan and his publisher Martin Goodman felt that this was a story that needed to be told, and would do more harm than good not to share it. So they published the book without the code's approval. This would be a stepping stone in easing up on the draconian censorship that comics have been facing since the 1950s, and help pave the way for the eventual downfall of the Comics Code Authority. If you want to go even further back, Spider-Man was game-changing from its very conception. The teenage superhero with no mentor who struggled under capitalism and had real-world problems was seen as groundbreaking and changed what could be done with the medium. Sure, the Fantastic Four did the heroes with problems first, but Spider-Man took it to a new level. Moving forward, every hero, even the flawless DC heroes, were beginning to display more of their human frailty. Even the costume was revolutionary. Most superheroes prior didn't wear masks that fully covered their faces. That was reserved for bad guys. There was really nothing quite like Spider-Man before. All of these elements, familiar and unfamiliar, came together to create something truly special. Something that we haven't seen from his stories in a long time. Now, this isn't to say that I don't like the character, or any of the modern stories that have come out in the past 2 decades. I love this character. I wouldn't be so critical if I didn't. And, despite my criticisms, I actually quite like all of Chip Zdarsky's work on Spider-Man, and even the new Ultimate. What I want to do with this video is to point out why whenever the topic of Spider-Man comes up, it's almost always about the movie versions, and why the comics just haven't been relevant in a long time. You see, comic book writers write for comic book fans, which is understandable since the market is so insular and doesn't allow much space for newcomers. But that limitation forces writers to constantly pander to the established aging crowd and toe the company line to protect the brand and ensure sales. These stories can never come to an end, so all of these iconic characters are forever stuck in the middle of their stories, no end in sight. There can never be long-lasting changes, since that would change the characters and eliminate brand synergy with other media. Spider-Man, as Marvel's flagship character, is especially guilty of this. A character that must push sales of his own titles with attention-grabbing stunts, must push less popular titles for endless crossovers, while acting as the brand mascot that represents Marvel as a whole. New ideas can't thrive in a market with no room for innovation. There's a Reddit post where someone shared a letter they received from Steve Ditko, where he shared his feelings on what it's like knowing his work will always remain in print due to his impact. Ditko responded by explaining that every generation has their favorite heroes across every medium, that there were heroes long before Spider-Man, there will be heroes long after Spider-Man, and that ours are already in decline. The obvious response is,
Well, Ditko couldn't be more wrong. Spider-Man is still hugely popular.
yeah, that's true, but what if he wasn't referring to a commercial decline, but a creative one? As we've seen with all the recent examples of creators giving a fresh take on Spider-Man only to rehash familiar elements, I can't help but wonder if what's special about this character has been lost. Maybe I seem like I'm being too harsh, but if these big companies are going to keep rehashing these old characters to us every few years, then I want them to create art, not content.